All right, we're 2 minutes past the hour. Thanks everyone for your patience, and make sure you're in the right place here today. My name is Michael Gerard. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Morphisec, and this is the Banking and Financial Services Cybersecurity Virtual Event. So real high level from an agenda perspective, we're going to kick things off today for about the next 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so. We're very fortunate to have several folks joining us for a banking and finance cybersecurity panel, talking about best practices for preventing cyber attacks in the financial industry. And then followed right up from that, we got our own Michael Gorelick, who will be talking about the financial industry threat landscape and giving a view from the cybersecurity trenches. So I'd like to provide some high-level intros to our speakers. Before I do that, a little bit about who we are and why we're doing this event. Morphisec, we're a cybersecurity software company at a real high level. What are we doing? We're bringing IT and security executives peace of mind, reducing risk, maintaining business continuity. And how are we doing that? Stopping the most advanced and disruptive attacks in memory at runtime that others do not. So we complement, we boost EDR, XDR, and GAV to stop these most advanced attacks that these other solutions are not in memory. We are stopping zero-day attacks, supply chain attacks, ransomware, and our secret sauce is what's called moving target defense. And you'll hear more about that in our sessions today. At a high level, we've been around 8 or so years, and we're helping protect over 5,000 companies from these advanced attacks. We're in over 8.7 million endpoints and servers, Windows servers, Linux servers, and we are stopping up to 30,000 or more attacks per day. You can see some of the other stats, some wonderful reviews we're fortunate to have from our customers on Gartner Peer Insights and PeerSpot, and have a number of patents in the cybersecurity area, specifically in moving target defense. And just a quote that I like to mention from just one of our customers, a banking customer, $30 billion in revenue, indicating Morphisec's in-memory protection solution is a must-have security control for an enterprise's defense in-depth strategy. It complements existing AV and EDR solutions, and it's critical control defending against zero-day threats. So as you can see on the screen up here, we're customer proven and across a number of sectors, particularly with respect to today's event, the banking and financial services and insurance industry. We do stop attacks at day zero, no prior knowledge needed, do not need information about signatures or existing behaviors, which is a unique value add that we bring to the table with our moving target defense. And we are able to stop attacks, be it across endpoints, servers, Windows environments, Linux environments, and an additional unique value add of providing visibility for organizations across for your vulnerabilities. And of course, offering professional services as part of this full package. And so we're able to offer best protection, very rapid deployment and installation, and also low total cost of ownership. So all of this protection without adding additional staff. All right, so thank you for your patience as I provided a bit of a high level in terms of who Morphisec is and why we are here today and bring this thought leadership to you. Lots more information on morphisec.com. And of course, we have a number of great ebooks and white papers created by our teams, our expert teams, with respect to moving target defense and how we're able to stop attacks, be they on Linux servers, be they complementing Microsoft Defender, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Sophos, Symantec, or other organizations as we augment their existing solutions. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers for today. And the first session, as I mentioned, is going to be a panel talking about cybersecurity and banking and finance. Our own Hootie Zach, Chief Product Officer, will be moderating this panel. Hootie has over 30 years experience, technology leadership experience, formerly with the Israel National Cyber Directorate, where he served as the Chief Executive Director of their technology unit. He has held chief executive roles with several leading cybersecurity firms, as well as president of the business unit at Amdocs, to name just a few. And he holds degrees in mathematics, physics, and electrical engineering. Hootie will be moderating our panel that will have Bryan Nash, CIO of McHenry Savings Bank, decades of experience within the IT and cybersecurity industry. And Bryan will also be joined by Richard Kirschner, Manager of Infrastructure and Access Security with Merrick Bank. And Richard brings over 10 years experience in the cybersecurity space and much experience spanning across 30,000 plus endpoints, as well as the work that he's doing today at Merrick Bank. And I'll introduce Michael as well later on, but a real high level. Please do join us after this panel. Michael Gorelick, our CTO and co-founder. He'll be presenting Financial Industry Threat Landscape. And Michael leads our malware research operation and helps to drive our technology strategy. Prior to MorphSec, Michael was VP of R&D at Motion Logic and previously served in senior leadership positions at Deutsche Telekom Labs. And he has extensive experience as a red teamer, reverse engineer, and a contributor to the MITRE CVE database. He's worked extensively with the FBI and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on countering global cybercrime, and a noted speaker, holds BS and MS degrees in computer science, and also jointly owns 7 patents in the IT space. All right. So without further ado, let me hand it off to Hudi, and he can introduce a bit more in detail our panelists and lead the panel. And I also would like to mention that at the bottom of your screen, please do enter your questions for our panelists, and Hudi will make sure to include those as part of the discussion, and as well as when Michael gives his presentation, fire away with any questions you might have for our panelists and guest speakers. Hudi, please take it away.
Thank you, Michael. I don't think I tell you something you don't know when I state that the financial sector is threatened by cyber attacks more than any other vertical. Research shows that banks are hit by a security incident 300 times more than similar businesses in other sectors. The cumulative damage for financial institutes worldwide is not known exactly, but is estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars per year, which is significant portion of the net revenue of this industry. This is despite the massive investment by banks and other financial organizations in cybersecurity products and services. Here also probably investing much more than any other sector. Cyber attacks on banks vary from relatively simple phishing and fraud activity through ATM malware operations, and go as far as organized campaign against banks' backend systems like SWIFT platform. Other than the direct financial damage to the bank and the customers, about 1/3 of cyber attacks on bank managed to steal a large amount of personal data belonging to the bank's customers. The most famous one being obviously the Equifax, which exposed personal data of 150 million American citizens. This data obviously can then be used to attack these unsuspecting customers via other channels, for example, to create spear phishing campaigns or leverage disclosed passwords that are often used by these customers in other domains, such as e-commerce websites. US Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell stated that the risk resulting from cyber attack is the most important and concerning risk that banks need to deal with. And this statement is validated by servers and analysis works done by international monetary funds and many other organizations. So with that scary picture in mind, we'll try to see if our panelists can help us encourage the audience and give us some leeway into what we should do in order to improve the situation. So I guess we'll start by each one of you. Maybe start with you, Richard, talking a bit about yourself, your background, and the organization that you represent, Merrick Bank.
Yeah, so Richard Kirschner. I've been in the finance industry for the last 12 years. Well, more than 12 years now, but 12 years in cybersecurity in the finance industry. The last 10 of that was at a major bank with well over 30,000 endpoints. Dealing with attacks constantly. So that's pretty much where I started. I'm now I'm at a credit card company, or recreational lender / credit card company in the finance industry again, dealing with the same thing, just on a much smaller scale. But like you said, I mean, attacks are prevalent daily. They're things that we're constantly on the lookout for, and I try to implement and create. Um, you actually used a good word previously, which was defense in depth. So I try to live my life and build my posture around that defense in depth term. Everything is a layered approach. You can never have just one single set failure point.
Okay. Bryan, you want to introduce yourself and your organization, McHenry
Sure.
Savings Bank?
Sure. My name is Bryan Nash. I've been in banking for over 40 years, in IT for about 30, and things have changed over the years. I like what Richard said is you can't just have a single line of defense. We're a small community bank. It doesn't matter when you read the regs, you all have to be the same way. And the issue that every bank faces is reputational risk. So you have to look at all your endpoints. You have to look at all the ways the users can manipulate. It's not your settings. It's what the user can figure out on how to get around something. And that's most of the time what, we're all trying to do our jobs. We're all trying to protect the networks. But when you make something that's a little friction for a user, they're going to try and get around it. And that's the part where we spend a lot of time looking at what do we do to make our users have less friction, but still keep the network protected. And things just keep getting harder and harder.
So you lead to my next question, which is, what is your from the cybersecurity point of view? What is your greatest concern? What is the greatest challenge you see in trying to protect your organizations against attacks? What keeps you up at night?
It's my end users. I had an end user last week figure a way around something. When I figured it out, I told him, I said, "You're brilliant. I never even thought about doing it this way." And he goes, "Well, I wasn't trying to do anything." I go, "You just went against 4 different policies, but you were trying to do your job." So, you try to not be rude to somebody, but you're also trying to protect your organization. And the end users, they're trying to do the easiest way that they can do their job or what's easiest for them. And that's my issue. That is my biggest issue.
Richard, what's your view on that?
I would agree with him. Definitely agree with you, Bryan, in that regard. I think users are kind of the number one risk. I mean, I could sit and spend, $1 billion on layered controls and tiered architecture and different privileged authentication methods and encryption and et cetera, ad nauseum, right? I could spend a ton of cash, an infinite amount of money on that. And at the end of the day, it's the user that clicks on the email that, has that leads to a don't ask, don't tell web host that then, allows for payloads to come down and, all that fun stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely the users. I mean, I think we differ a little bit. Like, I think my opinion of my users is that it's important. I think they're the number one for me. They're the number one risk. It's also for me. It's also important that I be seen as what I like to call myself is a trusted advisor. I don't like to call myself an information security manager or a leader or a security engineer or architect. I like to be a trusted advisor. I want to be a part of every project or implementation that the business unit requires from an operational aspect. So if somebody needs something to do their job, I want to be that guy that they call and say, "Hey, we want to do this. How do we do this and still not, and not suck? How do we do this and be secure?" And that's the guy that I try to be at every company that I'm at, and that's what I'm doing at the current company that I'm at as well. And I think thankfully that posture has kind of been good at changing a lot of the culture, which generally leads to people trying to find ways around things so that they can get their job done, rather than saying, "Hey, look, this is causing an issue. Like, I encourage people to be squeaky wheels. Be a squeaky wheel, because, you know, at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to know that it's causing a problem for you, and maybe I have a solution. And, you know, and if I don't, then, you know, we'll work together and figure something out. There's almost, I've never been in a situation where there wasn't a solution.
And from the, if you look at it from the other way, from the threat landscape point of view, what would be your you know, your biggest concerns?
Man, honestly, you know, I feel with the way that we're protected and layered. I mean, you've got so many things out there. There's rats and ransomware. Ransomware is a huge one. You know, credential stuffing, that's another massive one. You know, in fact, that's probably credential stuffing and reverse shells, C2, anything that can establish C2, phishing. Those are things that are, you know, those are the ones that would keep me up at night for sure.
Mm-hmm. Bryan, from your perspective?
From my perspective, it's ransomware. I mean, as a smaller financial organization, you know, our data is critical. And that's the one that, you know, you do your air gaps, you do all these other things to protect your data. It's just making sure you have it there. But then my second one is phishing. I mean, they are getting so unique, whether you call it spear phishing, regular phishing. I mean, it's getting pretty unique in how people are coming around these days.
In emails mostly, or also through other channels?
Emails mostly, but you
Mhm.
do see it in other channels, but emails are the majority. And if you don't have a single layer, I mean, if you only have a single layer in email, you're just asking for trouble.
Mm-hmm. I see. And despite the fact that investment in trying to protect cybercrime continues to grow, you know, year over year, maybe not this year, but the outcome is still, you know, still not good. I mean, the breaches just continue to increase. So what do you think is maybe the fundamental flaw? I don't know how to say it. The thing that prevents this this investment from being effective enough?
To me, it's the board of directors have gotten more involved these days, you know, because when you look at what the auditors and examiners say, it's your size doesn't matter. You know, we all need to have the same type of layering. And it's now with the boards getting on board with the spending, because it's not like it used to be, you know, you just had to put small investments. Now you start looking at your SIMs, you look at all your different layering. What's it cost? What's it cost for hardware replacements these days? And the board, most of the time, are on board with those because they understand it's the reputational risk you are protecting.
Mm-hmm. Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Bryan. I think I'd even add to what you're saying, Bryan, is that in certain areas, certain levels of the C-suite and board level, there are you know, there are actors on that level that don't have quite the grasp of the you know, the threat attack surface, right? So to them, it's money. That's all they're seeing is the money. They're not seeing, you know, they're not seeing the threat and the risk to, you know, the risk to the data, and so, you know, that I think ends up being, you know, one of the biggest hurdles to jump through for me is creating what's the best way to put this? You know, creating documentation that's easy for them to follow, and reporting and whatnot that allows them visibility that is sans the jargon, so that we can, you know, we can kind of just get straight through things, say, hey, look, I really need this, and here's why. Like, here's what would happen. Here are the potential risks that would happen if we don't have it, and here, you know, here's where we are today. And here's where we would be if we did have it. And, you know, and give a comparison so that they can make a better decision without having to learn, you know, all the things that they hired me to know. You know, I don't want my, you know, my C-suite to have to get back in the trenches and be the engineer anymore. You know, I don't want my board to to have to be engineers or architects either. I just want them to be able to make decisions and you know, help guide direction and you know, forward and advance projects. And I think that is, you know, one of the biggest limiting factors. I think is just, you know, you've got a lot of people that don't have a ton of experience in the full, you know, the vastness of the attack surface, and you know, quite frankly, if I were at that level, I probably wouldn't want to. You know, I probably wouldn't want to know. All I'd care about is my investment. And so, you know, the responsibility I feel is, you know, we have to communicate that, you know, look, you're you know, you care about your investment. Well, here's the risk to your investment.
See, banks and financial services in general are probably the most are working under the most strict compliance requirements as any other industry, I guess. Would you say that this compliance is a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? Where does it help, and where does it create a negative effect?
Man, so I'm in the middle of a massive certification process for my bank. I won't go into it too much, but it's a tough one. Do I think, I guess to answer the first question, do I think that it's helpful that we're, you know, that we're regulated and we're required to meet, you know, specific industry standards and things through standardizations like CIS, PCI DSS, you know, NIST, ISO, et cetera, yeah, absolutely. I think it is. I think they take a lot of the guesswork out of, you know, having to sit down and you know, I with all my experience and with my team's combined experience, you know, we're talking decades upon decades of experience with myself and my team, and we could sit down and try to hammer out a standard for, you know, hardening up a workstation or hardening up a server and still miss tons. And so having things like, you know, CIS requirements, CIS top 18, or you know, PCI 4.0, or, you know, PCI 3.2.2, and, you know, NIST 800, et cetera. Those are going to give you things that maybe you didn't even think about, you know. So while they can be a heavy lift and they can kind of suck to manage from a resource perspective on the day-to-day, and they can, you know, they can suck cycles away from your team. I really find them to be beneficial at the end of the day, as far as, you know, really tightening things up, you know, above and beyond compensating controls.
Brian, what's your view on that?
So I will agree with where Richard was going 100%. The issue that I have with all of it is your auditors and regulators that come in with their reading of the reg or the rule on how one interprets it versus another one interprets it. And that's the issues that we run into the most, is you think you're moving along in a path, you're being told by one association, yep, you're going the right way, you're doing this, and then all of a sudden another one walks in, well, you didn't do this. And we're going, we need to have standards in how your auditors and regulators come in. And that's really the hard part on some of it. I mean, the longer you've been in this game, the longer you know, okay, he's walking and he's going to tell us one thing, then the next guy's going to come in, and you just got to get a happy medium that everybody will agree upon. And vendor management right now is one of the hard ones for both sides to come to terms with.
Okay. It's very interesting. As you have moved or are moving more and more of your services to the cloud, to the public cloud, assuming that you do, I mean, I guess everybody does. What do you see? What do you see as new challenges that are related to this move, and where does it help you in terms of cybersecurity? I'm not speaking about obviously operational value.
So for us, the cloud is something, yes, we all have to look at. You have to really dive into your vendor management on that, because you have to look at what is the vendor using. Every one of them says, oh yeah, we have cloud, we're using Amazon Web Services. That's great. What are you doing for the security on it? Well, we're using Amazon Web Services. That's where you need to ask the vendor, well, where's your SOC? Where are your controls on AWS? I mean, you have the different layering. And then when you start saying this to some vendors, all of a sudden they go, what? And it shouldn't be the end user telling a vendor, these are things you need to be doing. But the sales cycle, everybody's out there now selling things to protect us, and they have the greatest of everything. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts of what they have, sometimes they may have a great product, but they're not protecting your assets by you connecting through their cloud services.
Mm-hmm. That's a very important distinction, definitely. Richard, how do you see it?
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. I think look, the cloud is the cloud's a scary place. The realization and the meme that's out there that my other computer is, or the cloud is just someone else's computer is real. And anytime you put anything in the cloud, you're making a decision to hand effectively a child off to to somebody else to manage and maintain, and you're hoping that they're going to take care of them the same way that you would. And whether that happens or not, hopefully you're doing things like third-party vendor risk reviews, and you're doing things to vet to vet and review vendors before you enter into agreements with them in the cloud. But there's only so much you can do, and so there's always going to be that roll of the dice, I think, to a certain degree, and just an amount of trust that's required in order to accomplish certain things. And to be real, in today's day and age, it's difficult to maintain the type of on-premises infrastructure requirements with things like end of life support for devices and refreshes and things like that. It just gets expensive. So the cloud is a very, I mean, it's for lack of a better word, it's sexy. It's everybody wants it because it's cheaper in the long run, and easier to manage and maintain, because you can operationalize something super quickly, and you can operationalize it across multiple platforms and separate domains, and and unify otherwise separate domains. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, Brian's correct. It can be a dangerous game. It can be a dangerous game for sure.
Okay. By the way, do you on a totally different perspective, do you use or share information through threat or incident sharing platforms like FSISAC and stuff like that? And if so, to what extent does it serve you? Does it help you?
Yeah, so I'm a member of a few private forums specific to the financial industry for indicators of compromise sharing. We share things like YAR rules, PCRI, anything that's discovered in the wild, up to and including 0 days. I worked with I've worked with a number of huge, even larger banks than I was at the time. So it's helpful. I mean, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. It really depends. I mean, something that's going to hit, a company like, a larger company like, say, Chase, may not necessarily be something that's going to hit me. You know, I mean, me being the little guy, you know, I'm more likely to attract kind of a mid-level script kiddie or you know, I don't know. I don't know that I would necessarily warrant enough, you know, I'm not an attractive enough target for something like the APT, you know, an APT attack or something like that. But you know, you always have to be prepared for it one way or another. But yeah, so I am, you know, I do enjoy being a part of those. I am also a part of FSI SAC, and FSI SAC, you know, it's okay. US CERT, I'm on that as well. US CERT is okay as well. I mean, it's just they're all kind of behind the times. I find the private ones are more real time, and you tend to get things that are just, you know, as they're spinning, you know, like, hey, we just saw this 2 seconds ago, and we're digging now, and you know, and then it becomes a collaboration of a bunch of people. So where, you know, FSI SAC and US CERT and all those other you know, forums for IOC sharing and stuff, you know, it's just like, here's what we saw, you know, here's all the data we have about it, but it's, you know, a day or 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or whatever, however long it takes them to publish. Yeah, I mean, it just
2 days IOCs are
yeah, yeah. So, and you know, and you never know. I mean, if it's something really bad and it's in the wild, then you know, that's scary. So yeah, they can be useful. They can be useful, but oftentimes they're, more often than not, they tend to be a little behind.
Is that your view as well, Brian?
I will agree 100% with Richard on that. We're all required basically to have an FFI SAC for your auditors, regulators, but the private ones are the ones that seem to get it to you faster. You just need to make sure your agreements that you've signed with the private ones cover you for when you are sharing. But yeah, Richard is 100% right on that one. I don't have anything else to add to that one.
Okay. Looking. By the way, would you do you have any legacy footprint in your organization, and what, if so, what unique challenges do you have in trying to protect them?
So I think we all have some legacy stuff, whether you want to admit to it or not. The issue is with your legacy is for us, we have some old hardware, and keeping it up and running. You know, you can buy parts here, you can get parts there. It's the issue that we run into is, I keep saying auditors and regulators, is how are you protecting it with firmware? How are you protecting with X when you're using old hardware? And sometimes they don't care, even if you got it VLAN subnetted off, things like that. They want to know how are you getting these current patches and everything else. And that's the issue that we run into is, you know, sometimes you just need this old application for X and only it can get to through this. But, you know, that's the issue is how is it seen by your auditors and regulators, period.
Okay. When you look forward to 2023 with the, you know, financial situation being what it is, how do you see the cybersecurity budget, maybe not necessarily in your organization, but in general in the industry? How do you see them trending in 2023? And you know, what do you expect the impact of that trend would be, Richard?
So, oh, sorry,
Brian. Okay, go on. Doesn't matter.
So for us, we're looking at it is it is going to be a larger year for us for spend. There's so many different attack points, you know, from what you used to. So many other things you have to look at, whether you're using third parties, how are you managing your third parties? All of that has to come into play now more than it ever did. And so your spend is going to be more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's 100%. It's going to be our budget's going to be bigger.
And the financial situation doesn't have any impact on that. There are, you know, verticals where their, you know, spending is reduced.
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be areas, obviously, if there are going to be some areas that are impacted. I don't see security as being one of them. I really don't.
Agreed.
I think you're going to see things like, you know, Brian mentioned earlier, you have there's various types of impact to a successful attack, right? And reputation is a really big one, and it's surprisingly large to the board and to the public, right? And so the the need to keep that down it will weigh over certain business requirements. So yeah, security is going to be 100%. It's going to be 100%.
And speaking of which, Brian, you mentioned managing third parties. So supply chain obviously is a huge concern, and it's growing with supply chain attacks, being more and more prevalent. What do you think maybe again you or the industry as a whole should do differently than it did in years past in order to better address this threat?
Well, that's a really complicated question you just asked there. I mean, you have so many different layers in that. I mean, you've got your hardware now, where you go to order new hardware, and I won't mention the vendor, but we needed some backbone equipment, and they've already told us 360 days, and that's not a guarantee. And so you start now looking at, how can I mitigate this threat by doing this another way until I can get hardware or software fixes. That for us is one of the, where your vendor due diligence comes into play, because a lot of times you are going to rely on that third party. How can you help me through this? And that is a rough one for us.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, speaking on physical supply chain, for sure. I mean, you can't get what you can't get. And
yeah, but when you talk about software supply chain and all the attacks coming from
like
there.
the attack from a software supply. So yeah. But look, a supply chain attack is water is wet, right? I mean, it's really, you're not going to know until you're hoping that you have the proper things in place that can detect the behavior post the download, right? I mean, there have been compromised certificate authorities that when that happened, you have to assume that your supply chain is intact until you notice odd behavior coming from something, and you just can't you can't assume that the supply chain is 100%. You can make sure, you can assume that trust stance with them initially, but you can never fully validate that that they're not going to have some sort of compromise. And so it's a tough one. You have to rely really heavily on, again, that layered approach, where you're looking at things like in your SIM, hey, this is behaving weird, this .NET file is making a network connection to somewhere in some crazy place, and you have to investigate that. You got to be willing to dig into it, instead of sit back and say, oh no, it's just .NET. Microsoft would never be compromised. Whatever. And yeah, it's a problem. And like I said, initially water is wet. You're downloading something, and you'll just never know until it happens, until the payload executes.
Richard, the only thing I want to add to that is, you're 100%, but look at like Log4j. When we brought that in, how many of the vendors weren't prepared for their software to correct it? Look how many months you went, and you had to do what you said. You had to look at different layers to protect your internal assets, just because of the Log4j.
Yeah, and because of infrastructure and the way the architecture of the logging, honestly, I don't see it going away. I see it becoming, like that internet meme where you're building a wall for a dog to figure out how to get around, and it's just, the dog just keeps getting over it every single time. Eventually, we've got when there was a new CVE released, yesterday or the day before, for a similar similar attack based on Log4j's initial IOCs. Obviously, the payload and stuff is different now, but the end result is still the exploitation.
Yeah, I've read somewhere that the current estimate that about 30% of the instances of application using Log4j are still exposed, have not been patched.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you're talking like this type of stuff these are architectural, same thing with, side channel attacks in the CPU and predictive execution attacks within the CPU as well. Like it's really difficult to change physical architecture of the way things are working in order to mitigate. So that's when risk comes in, and you do the review of what's my impact, what's my potential impact, what how many devices do I have that are potentially exposed, what's the potential of me of this hitting me, and then the algorithm that comes into play to make the determination on whether or not what actions you take.
And then you got cost.
Yep, and then you have cost. Absolutely, that's figured.
So with again, without getting too specific, with these bigger budgets that you both foresee for the organizations in 2023, what do you think would be the, in banks of your organization's profile, what would be the most important project, the most important step forward that will be made in order to improve the defense?
I think it's going to depend, right? I think it depends on every institution I've worked for has had a security program at a varied level. So you have some companies are very well established, and it's like clockwork. They've got things like clockwork, and the only thing that you're really doing from an engineering and architecture standpoint is keeping the lights on, doing the investigations, and changing tools out when things are when new things come in and into the industry, and or things go end of life. So that's a difficult one. It's a really difficult question to say. Like for me, from an investigative purpose, or from a point of view from doing investigations on the blue side, I would say things like full packet capture would be fantastic for us to get into place. WAF would be fantastic. There are a number of things. I as far as endpoint controls, I'd say we're pretty solidly layered. But there's you could spend $1 billion.
Sure.
That's at the end of the day, that's the answer. Is you could spend $1 billion and buy everything.
And that's why you need to prioritize, obviously, and that's
Yeah.
your probably your one of your most difficult tasks. Bryan, you wanna?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for the smaller community banks, we have to deal with cores, the FIS, Jack Henry, Fiservs, and, we are tied to them. The end user doesn't know it. It's our reputation. So if they have an issue, it's our issue. And that's, one of the things that we always have to look at is how much protection are they have on our network. Then you have to look at the connections between your cores to yourself. How are you protecting those? It's not the old days where you just let them connect and have their way. You're now making sure that they're only getting X on your network. And to the small community banks, that's a big thing.
Okay. I could go on for hours, I guess, Richard and Bryan. This is really fascinating. But unfortunately, I think we're out of time, and we want to give Michael Gorelick the the time for his fascinating presentation. So really, thank you so much. This has been really insightful and interesting, at least for me, I guess, for the audience as well. So thanks for your time. And we'll probably continue to talk much more. So with that, thank you. And I hand it over back to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Hudi. Wonderful job managing that panel. And Brian, Richard, thank you so much for attending. Really appreciate that. And so let's see, without further ado, so let me introduce Michael Gorelick. As I mentioned in the opening for our summit today, Michael will be providing you a view of the financial industry threat landscape. In his words, a view from the cybersecurity trenches. And just to reiterate once again, Michael Gorelick, he's our Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Morphisec. Michael leads Morphisec's malware research operation and helps drive our technology strategy. Prior to Morphisec, Michael was VP of R&D at Motion Logic, and he had previously served in senior leadership positions at Deutsche Telekom Labs. Extensive experience as a red teamer, reverse engineer, and a contributor to the MITRE CVE database. Michael has also worked with the FBI, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on countering global cybercrime. Noted speaker for SANS, B-Sides, RSA, Black Hat, and more. And he holds bachelor's, master's degrees in computer science and jointly owns 7 patents in the IT space. So without further ado, Michael, thank you for joining us. And we're all excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. So much of an introduction. I can go home.
And
So,
quick note, Michael, sorry, just before you dive in, and there's a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So as Michael continues, please do continue to put your questions in there. We got lots of them for the panel, and please keep them coming. Thank you, Michael. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Michael. Hope my presentation is in the right sharing mode. We're good to go. Again, thank you, Michael, for the introduction. We had an amazing panel right now. Actually wrote down a couple of interesting notes that I maybe were less aware before. So really my goal today is basically to present you and talk about the financial kind of sector, the impact of the landscape. I will start kind of high level. We'll present what do we have here in 2022, what really happened. Some of those things will be known and clear to most of you. Others, I hope to innovate for some. Then we'll kind of drill down a bit more into the financials, and we'll get hopefully a couple of case studies, and then we'll end a bit with kind of what are the more recommended approaches to try and reduce the risk for the threat landscape. I think this first part were already covered by Michael Gerard. I'm not going to speak about myself again. The only thing, I do have quite a lot of experience in cybersecurity, more than 20 years, and I'm enjoying it daily. We'll do, again, a very short introduction for Morphisec, though Michael already presented during the panel. Again, one of my goals is to reiterate and explain what Morphisec is in this one slide. So Morphisec, again, we are a defense in depth approach. We are providing a very specific focus layer on top of the existing endpoint solutions, CDRs, XDRs, etc., focusing on runtime protection, preventing breaches, preventing ransomwares, preventing stealthier attacks by basically complementing the existing defense layer or defense in depth solutions that you have in the environment, while being installed side by side with the different security solutions. Those could be CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Sophos, Symantec, McAfee, etc. We, as a last layer of defense, we still prevent around 30,000 attacks per day, which is a lot. Protect more than 5,000 businesses. And have some of the biggest names in the industry that we are installed on those organizations. Now, kind of starting, as I mentioned, generically. And before we dive into the financials, let's just kind of go through what we had during 2022. Even during the panel, Log4j was mentioned. Log4j was actually on in December 2021. Nevertheless, the impact of Log4j, Log4Shell, and now Text4Shell a week ago, is still let's say, is a big headache for many CISOs, many security teams, whether it's financials or non-financial institutes. It's tough and difficult to find those assets, those applications dependencies. Even if you use all the tooling possible, you still find quite a lot of applications vulnerable. And as Woody mentioned, we are yet to go through a couple of years until we'll really cover the whole attack surface in the best way. As part of supply chain, this is definitely one of the bigger risks and bigger events during end of 2021, 2022. So it's worth mentioning. One of the other events I choose to mention, I think is important, was during the start of the war between Ukraine and Russia, the Conti ransomware leak. Conti was the most prolific one of the more dangerous ransomware groups, together with Logobit is also right now is on the first place, and the leakage of the code of the Conti ransomware by a Ukrainian researcher marked a significant kind of threat landscape mark. A lot of things we found out from those discussions between the group, how the business works better. But essentially, the leakage of the code also is good for blue teamers to develop better protection, but it is also good for the attackers because they can reuse code as written right now and create branches of Conti ransomware. So we are expected to see more of those during 2022, 2023. Many of the group members moved to other groups as well, and definitely I would expect to see more there. One of the more interesting exploits during 2022, the Folina exploit on the Microsoft Folina exploit was basically a part of the diagnostic tool that you could use to execute malicious code. First, it was utilized a lot in part of the phishing emails, documents, that eventually executed through the diagnostic tool, the malicious command. And side by side, together with the additional event that was marked by Microsoft of the disable of macros, this basically led to a very smooth transition to a different landscape. Now, the node that Microsoft basically published, the disable of macros by default, had a very significant impact on all the threat landscape, even today. It might sound for some people as a small thing, but it changed really the way many of the threat actors deliver the phishing emails, the attack chains. And exploits, definitely the increase importance of exploits definitely increased due to this notification, but also due to this notification, the phishing shifted to kind of downloading of containers, ISO files, ING files, files like archive files, etc., instead of downloading documents. You would have an email with a link that led to download of a container archiving file, which is very hard to scan and delivers the same malware that a macro would deliver. This kind of change enforced a lot of the CISOs and the security teams to think differently, to shift their thinking, to shift the education of their teams and their organizations, and to develop additional security on top. Additional significant event, again, the geopolitical landscape change, exactly like the COVID shift. It's also impacted on the cyber landscape. Groups have shifted to sites in some way, though ransomware as a service was on a trend up in some places. Some groups basically prefer to contain everything and do all the activities as one group. There are a couple of examples, I will not name those. So due to this geopolitical change, definitely there are some shifting in the ransomware as a service, some shifting in the initial broker access, and some shifting on the delivery of how ransomware is being delivered. Some shift in ransomware to destructive manners, like the wipers that were used in critical infrastructure, and some shift in ransomware to exfiltrate information without encryption. Whether it's due to this shift or due to the changes and moving and split between the different threat actor groups, again, this event had a significant impact on the landscape in 2022. Not long ago, the release of the Logbit builder does provide blue teams better ways to protect and develop better behavior kind of protection patterns. But it also marks kind of and shows those differences that the different group members have, and let's say with some effort, people will be able to use even the builder itself and the binary to abuse some of those very advanced techniques and integrate those into other ransomwares. And again, lately, we have the new Exchange 0-day and the Fortinet exploits that were released in October, and right now also Text4 Shell, definitely big events that will have a following impact. And the 2022 is still not over. I do expect for more interesting things to happen. Definitely interesting year. Now that we kind of covered the full landscape and of big milestones during the 2022, we're diving back into financials, right? Some of those things, some of those statistics have been mentioned during the panel at start, and just think that some of them worthwhile to mention again. Some of the things are very, very crucial, right? We definitely see that 23%, 22.4 according to the IBM report, is attacking finance sectors. So it's a significant part, right? 23% of cybersecurity attacks attacking finance sector. So finance, I'm including BFSI, it's also insurances, all this industry. Big portion of them attacking banks. We have a portion attacking insurances. I'll present a couple of case studies, very interesting. Some of them maybe most of you know CNA, one of the biggest insurance companies, one of the biggest ransomware that was paid during 2021. So definitely serious vectors. During the panel mentioned servers, and I mean, according to the report by Fear, 90% of those breaches that involved financial industry involve servers, whether it's for exfiltration, lateral movement, and eventually collection of this information and stealing this information. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Brian mentioned credential stuffing and lateral movement are a big pain for the financial industries, even before ransomware. Ransomware is usually the last one to happen. Some additional very interesting report by VMware suggests to read as well. 74% of financial security leaders experienced at least one ransomware attack over the past year. I mean, we're talking about almost every enterprise had at least one breach during the year. and 62% of those paid the ransom. So ransomware, as were mentioned by our two guests in the panel, is a pain. It's not the only pain. Credential stuffing, supply chain is also pains, but the end result, I mean, ransomware definitely has an impact. And the financial industry also has an impact with regard to regulation, legalization, and more, and we'll talk about those as well. Just a bit of the numbers putting here on the table. So we talked about all kind of statistics that involve really financials, but if we look what is the final kind of impact with regard to breach cost, you see that financial is on the second place after healthcare, though very much protected with multiple agents and nice security posture. We see that I mean, we have here quite a significant impact, and if we focus on the United States, the impact is even higher and can go to $9.4 million. In general, in the world, we are around $6 million impact in average in a breach in 2022, which is a significant. Obviously, there are special cases like CNA that we will mention, but in average, 6 million is a significant breach. Now, on the right side, I kind of mentioned the very interesting, again, IBM report mentions what are the different numbers, assuming you are deploying automation and XDR. You know, many organizations, including financials, are shifting to XDR today, which is also the right way to go. I mean, visibility, orchestration with EDR and network events are important for visibility. And obviously, financial sectors are audited and they need to document, and they have to have those visibility even if event happens. But the point is that even with the deployment of those tools, you still get almost a year of no detection for breach. So we get to 203 days with the deployed XDR of no detection or until you detect the breach or the incident, and then 72 more days for containing this incident. Obviously, we'll see different kind of ranges. We'll see also months or weeks, but this is kind of the average that was reported by many CISO professionals, and it's an interesting number. It means that definitely it's important to deploy XDR. It reduces the time to detect and time to contain, but what about the rest? So in this case, again, defense in-depth approach is important. We'll talk about how actually Morphosis can help reduce it even further, and 20-30% more. It's a very significant number. It's what can differentiate between being impacted on those $6 million and paying those this money, or staying without a breach full year. An interesting numbers by Tfir during 2021 heading to 2022. We've seen an increase in system intrusion as an attack vector. Though, I mean, web applications and social engineering were significant, social engineering will stay significant. I mean, as mentioned in the panel, the human factor will always be a human factor. Humans will always do mistakes. Therefore, you always will need a bunch of solutions and education and more to protect against those. But interestingly, system intrusion definitely increased and had the biggest impact during 2021, 2022. The contribution for this system intrusion mostly came in 2021 due to the SolarWinds supply chain and some other supply chains, and then 2022 you had the Log4j as well. If we put aside those supply chains that definitely contributed a significant amount of attacks on the financial sector, then we're still left with email, web applications, and desktop sharing applications on the second part. So still have significant risk, but supply chain is a growing risk that requires solution. and currently do not have a solution. Now that we know a bit about the different statistics, so we'll talk a bit about the different case studies, right? We'll start with a very known for some case study, for some others less known. But again, CNA, a major insurance company, as part of the BFSI industry, 40 billion in revenue, 6,700 employees. The ransomware attack of the whole chain caused the exfiltration of 75,349 PIIs, private information that was leaked to outside. I mean, the impact of this is enormous. Later on, I mean, I'm not even talking about the ransomware. Just this August, there were a lawsuit, private lawsuit against against one of the banks. I'll talk about that. Specifically focusing on the Graham-Bailey law, which talks about privacy. We'll mention that as well. But exposure of PII can have a long-term impact, which sometimes is hard to even accumulate and count or sum up. It may be even higher than the impact of dealing with ransomware itself. So in the case of CNA, we have more than 50,000 devices impacted, including machines that were remotely connected through VPN. As soon as they connected, they got encrypted. Obviously, aside of the information that was exfiltrated, the impact of not even using the network was devastating. CNA itself identified the attack only 2 weeks after the attacker already infiltrated and propagated inside the network, inside the servers. The initial access was quite easy. I mean, we're talking about a person that got to a malicious website and downloaded a malicious plugin or, malicious update through the browser. It's all started with one person. And following that, there were propagation in the environment. We'll not get into the details, but during all that time, there were alerts, there were notifications, there were failure to block and quarantine the event. Essentially, between March 20 to 21, attacker decided to deploy the ransomware after disabling the security tools because they had the highest administrator privileges. So it disabled the current next generation and EDR solutions that were in place, and then deployed the ransomware. Couple of interesting points here: the negotiation aspect and the incident response plan that were executed. I mean, initially there were a request from the attacker to pay for $55 million. They even said that they will increase the cost if they are not being paid. So essentially, CNA paid around $40 million, which was the record sum or the highest sum that was paid then, to just restore the network. Interestingly, some of the researchers, as part of incident response, found the data and the repositories intact and succeeded to get this data. But using obviously the decryptors, CNA succeeded to restore the network within 2 months. 2 months it took them from the incident to get back to normal. Those 2 months obviously have additional impact on the environment. So we see how one event can have an impact for a couple of months later. And right now, I'm sure, additionally to that, obviously they also introduced monitoring, credit monitoring softwares and others, which also cost money, and obviously additional impacts of negotiation, etc. Definitely interesting case study. I mean, insurances overall are very lucrative target for attackers. They have a lot of IP, a lot of PI, a lot of private information, for people with regard to social security's health, a lot of private information for the insured companies. It's a nice way as a supply chain to get to some of those companies as well. So we definitely see a lot of those companies being attacked over 2021 and 2022. We have here an example by Pan American Life Insurance Group. We're talking about also, I think it's about 1 or 2 billion in revenue. I'm not sure. But we have the Revel Group stealing 170 gigabyte of PI data. AXA Insurance in Asia hit by Avedon, and the SAM Insurance hit by Hive. And right now, AON Insurance really recently were hit as well, though there is no confirmation if it's hit by ransomware. In total, we're talking about 412 million during 2020 only. It's like an increase of 341% in ransom payments. That's quite significant. Additional case study, interesting case study with regard to regulation. I talked about insurance. Just an example from a bank. We have the Flagstar Bank. It's a Michigan-based financial service bank that was attacked actually the second time during 2021. I mean, they were attacked in starting of 2021, and then at the end of 2021, we're talking about a breach in December, and the discovery of the event was only in June. I mean, we are talking about more than half a year of a breached network of a bank, right? A bank with a 1.6 billion revenue, 5,200 employees. During this incident, we have 1,500,000 records exposed, including social security's healthcare information and more. There were, following obviously the discovery, identified all kind of traces for the attackers being inside, executing regular tooling. And as I mentioned, just as an example for a long-term impact, only now there were lawsuits submitted by private citizens against the negligence of maintaining PII in a proper way, especially after second breach. Those regulations and the risk of being sued, obviously the fines are around $100,000, sued through this Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act. There are also motivation for the attackers. Attackers know that the financial sectors will be sued. They understand the importance of PIIs and the fact that there is additional impact, additional cost that on the banks. They definitely will continue to attack financials. PCIs, PHIs, and private information have a very high cost in the dark web. So definitely, I don't see this disappearing. Now that we have kind of presented a couple of case studies, talk about what are the different, very quickly mentioning, what are different initial access patterns that we see today, specifically focusing around financials. So overall, if you see all the different initial access, you can also check out MITRE, though it's sometimes less updated. The obvious places will be social engineering, right? We still see more than 50% social engineering as a first way in, whether you're convinced to open a document or download the ISO or do any of those things. Started from phishing. I think during the panel mentioned phishing as a problem, but phishing can be also smishing and can be also, other vectors as well. Supply chain becomes very much significant, whether it's SolarWinds, Log4j, Kaseya, name it. You have a lot. Initial access brokers. It's a big deal. I mean, obviously, whether ransomware as a service or malware as a service, right? Initially, you have someone that may have an initial access to the network for some simple things like miners or whatever, and they can resell access, and they do that constantly. Resell access to the bigger groups. Those access sell can range through, I mean, a couple of $100s to a couple of $1,000s, and essentially they get even maintenance from the initial access brokers themselves. If there are not enough privileges, try to elevate privileges and get you full access. So it's very popular today. In the dark web, you can find quite a lot of those initial access brokers. Brute forcing RDP, it was very popular. Now a bit less, obviously in the financial institutes even lesser, because they are highly regulated and highly audited. So I would see less and less obviously exposed RDP stuff. But exploitations of older VPNs or exploitations of exchanges of firewalls, this kind of network exposed applications, definitely a vector. Not the main vector, nevertheless still a vector. Exploits like Folina definitely were attacking financials. Again, right now it's patched, but it was a vector. Default configurations, I would say that mostly for those that are doing web transition or digital transformation and moving, and I think some of you in the panel mentioned moving to cloud and basically moving the liability. It's definitely an important stage in which you kind of, from one side, reduce the risk, but you also increase the attack surface if you do that the wrong way. And unfortunately, there is not enough expertise. People are doing mistakes. They're deploying instances with open configurations, and breaches are still happening due to this faulty default configuration transition. So digital transformation basically introduces new attack surface. And obviously stolen credentials, hey, those are resold. Many times private people use their private computers and they use their passwords that are not very much different from the passwords they use in the bank. Yes, they might be very long and very interesting, but the variation is not different, and therefore the exposure is serious. Okay, we talked about initial access. Let's see if we take all the malwares, and in this case, we use a PICOS report. I love this report. It's really talking about what are the different trends for malwares. If we take all those 200,000 samples of malwares and try to understand what changed, what do we see today, and with regard to the threat landscape, if we map those two techniques, how really malware work today, right? We talked about initial access, but what happens when the initial access happens, right? What happens when the malware runs? What are the places that you should focus, because those are the most popular things that really successful. I mean, they're successful. There are a lot of them because they are successful. So one of the observations from this report, very important observation, that the top techniques after taking those 200,000 malwares and mapping those to MITRE, the top techniques are using defense evasion techniques. So they basically apply defense evasion techniques to evade security solutions, to become and be stealthy, to really succeed in their attack goals. They have to go through defense evasion. And if they took 200,000 samples, they validated it, and they find out, I mean, again, execution, you take here signed binary proxy execution through legitimate Windows processes, process injection, executing through the memory of other applications, basically injecting your malicious execution, stay stealthy, stay fileless, living off the land, stay in memory. So, I mean, if this is so successful, why not everyone using it? So everyone are starting using it because it's so much successful. Five of the first one are defense evasion. We also see that at least four here of the top 6 techniques are also in memory. Don't have to be evasive and be in memory. But it's the fact that at least 4 are evasive in memory, which means that again it works because of challenges of existing security solutions that cannot scan the memory all the time at any given moment. Because again, the state changes all the time. It's very hard to scan all the time. It may have a significant impact on performance. Just a couple of statistics from our database, just looking at specifically focusing around backdoors as a way of persistency, as a way to maintain an entry after the initial access to your organization. I mean, everyone here heard about CobbleStrike, Metasploit as a backdoors. Right now, there is some increase with Brute Rattle as well, which is full in-memory variant. So we see those obviously a lot, and there's an increase of backdoors all the time. And you can clearly see by the charts, the increase of use of CobbleStrike and Metasploit are significant. And again, those are still there in-memory components, so it adheres to the report that we reported before, talking about defense evasion techniques, in-memory stealth evasion from security solutions. Now, we present kind of the gap. We'll talk in the next slide a bit more on the gap. Moving target defense, which we are talking about, I mean, needs to help reduce the risk to fight against the gap. The gap is essentially those 277 days, as I mentioned in the report, that still we need to minimize, right? The breach cost, we saw, I mean, the numbers vary. They can be 4.3 and 597, depending on the sector. And the industry as millions is significant. So can we reduce this risk further? Can we help to eliminate the next breach that will cost you 4.3 million or 5 or 6 million? I would say yes to many of those cases. Just one more slide. Why is the current security solution are challenged with really solving the in-memory fileless type of techniques or malwares? This is very technical, so I will not get into the images too much. But when the application executes, its state constantly changes. In order to locate and identify malicious code or malicious pattern with this application during execution time, you need to scan the application all the time. You cannot scan the application all the time because it has immediate impact on the system, right? So security solutions said, okay, our scanning of files works, so why not scanning, doing the same approach and scanning the memory all the time for similar signatures or patterns? So this is based on hooking, right? This is based on a specific times and points and events. The problem with that is all the visibility lacking. Between those point of time that you scan, you still do not know a lot. So you don't know 99% of the times what happens inside the code. So for the attackers, it's convenient. This is why they use evasion. This is why they use stealthiness. This is why they use memory, because again, they cannot be scanned and they can cherry pick the time that the malicious code executes. So there is a problem. Obviously, they can also tamper and hooks, which is easy, and it's being done again and again and again. So back kind of to, again, great. So we have a problem. The gap is clear. And we also find out that in the financial industries, as well as other industries, there are a lot of stealth in-memory type of attacks initiated from, again, social engineering, exploitation, initial access brokers, etc. We get to a position in which many of those attacks need to go through defense evasion. Many of them are going through memory to evade the detection. So we said, okay, so the current traditional approach doesn't work. I mean, you cannot scan all the time. Let's play the cat and mouse with the attacker. Let's change the target system, how it looks like all the time. So we said, okay, you have a different vectors, attack vectors, like that will for sure get to email, to memory to evade. Let's prevent them there. When they look for something that they think they know, we'll change that. So take an example of a threat vector, credential theft. For example, when you target a specific password, take Mimikatz, for example, or browser stealer, info stealer, any of those credential stuffing kind of problems, you specifically target an offset or structure of an application. And when you target that, the structures have been changed, again, by Morphisec, and instead you find out things that we implanted there, that we left in there. And try to read those, decrypt those, you're being caught. So it's a different approach. Instead of scanning, we're changing the target, and the attacker fails. The same with shellcodes, the same with the exploits and supply chains, similar kind of techniques. We shake the ground beneath the attacker. We change the and create the attack surface unpredictable. So very different approach, because again, the traditional approach doesn't really work. And with moving target defense, Morphisec succeeds again, prevent many of those stealthy attacks. Getting to the last slide, we really at the right moment in time, 40 minutes to this presentation. Our perfect optimal solution, not perfect, but optimal solution that we can suggest is having those EDRs, XDRs in place, with which we saw, according to the different reports, are vital to your security posture, to your visibility, to reduce the attack surface by 30%, more or less, to have obviously your backups working, at least on the servers, and validate those working, apply hardening, and implement moving target defense, defense layer, defense and depth solution in place. As soon as you do that, you basically make your attack surface is harder, and you harder than your neighbors. So basically, you just need to be more secure than a different organization. It's easier to be attacked. I hope I showed an interesting kind of view and an interesting innovative approach. And I would love to see if we have questions.
Thanks, Michael. Wonderful information. So I've got a number of questions here. Let's see. First one, you were mentioning moving target defense. Question about what's the advantage of implementing moving target defense for the financial sector? Anything specific to that industry?
Yeah, I mean, this one is a very good question. Obviously, aside of the efficacy or the protection that you add on top of your existing protection and bridge the gap, the independence of the network, the independence of the updates, of the signatures provides a significant, amazing advantage, because then you can deploy the solution in critical environments that doesn't have to be connected to the network. You don't need to be connected to some kind of a cloud machine learning solution. You'll be protected 100% of the times with your solution. Additional advantages is the performance impact, obviously. When moving target defense, you do not need to scan for signatures all the time. So the impact on scanning is irrelevant. So I will not obviously lie. Any solution have an impact on performance, and anyone that will say otherwise, I wouldn't continue the discussion with him. But it's incomparable to any other solution that is based on scanning, based on identifying behaviors, etc. What we need to know is how your system works, and basically morph it in a way during load time. During runtime, there is no impact on the performance of the application whatsoever. Some of our customers, even the biggest financial security customers that we have, actually prefer to deploy Morphisec in many of their critical environments, and in some cases even not deploy the EDR solutions, and instead kind of apply segmentation together with Morphisec to provide the best security posture. So performance, the lack of dependence of cloud, the no need of security additional head count, right? Security for security personnel to identify detection and try to understand what you have. We're talking about prevention approach. All those are very significant advantages to what we deploy today on customer environments.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So I've got time for 2 more questions here coming in from the audience. Let's see, select which environments and operating systems is moving target defense helpful with?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I mean, MorphoSec uses moving target defense in those advanced defense layered approach into operating systems, which are both Windows and Linux, supporting all the popular distributions, all the popular OSs that you would probably use. Obviously, if you choose to go with something very proprietary, custom, we would need to validate first the support, but most of the biggest support of the system is given. Moving target defense is definitely relevant there in Linux as well as in Windows to prevent similar type of attacks. I mean, code injection, code execution, lateral movement attacks, credential theft, etc. Stealthy attacks. So it's really relevant to all those environments that are popular in the financial industry as well as in the other industries.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So one more question here. Make sure I get this right from the audience member. Hopefully, let's see. What are the advantages of combining moving target defense with existing solutions? I think you had mentioned EDRs, XDRs, EPPs. Maybe talk a little bit more in detail about that, the augmentation.
Yeah, I think it's it's more or less what I described. Again, the existing solutions, EDRs, XDR, are critical to your environment from two points of view. One is, hey, you need something to fight against the known threats, right? Known signatures, known behaviors, known patterns. And there are quite enough of attackers that duplicate new attacks and recreate new same signatures or the same behavior patterns. The other one is you need those solutions for visibility, especially in financial industry, for auditing purposes. For later on, you need to know, okay, you have that and that and that, whether this is insider or malware or whatever. But you also need to fight the unknown threats, the stealthy threat, right? The in-memory, the fileless type of threat, which is a challenge for existing solution. The combination of those two kind of endpoint solutions. An endpoint, I mean, this could be C2 in the cloud instance. Endpoint is an endpoint, it's an operating system that you can control. The combination of those two approaches will provide you the best security posture in your organization. You will not be 100% protected. I don't think you can get to be 100% protected, but you will have a significant risk reduction with a combination of two approaches that really solve somewhat different problems.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. Been very insightful, valuable, and let's see, appreciate that. Let me share my screen. We'll just finish up here. Pull it up. All right. So once again, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Michael going through our financial industry threat landscape, view from the cybersecurity trenches. And also we had our panel session earlier on banking and finance cybersecurity. So everybody knows that we will make these presentations, everything available in an on-demand format, and you'll get an email about those. And certainly for additional resources, you can check out morphosec.com and look in our resources section, additional learnings. And in particular, there are 3 ebooks that you may be interested in. One is Linux servers, how to defend the new cyber attack frontier. You can access that on our website, but also go to tinyurl.com/protect Linux. The second one, there's an ebook that goes much more in detail about moving target defense and how it does augment EPP, EDR, XDR, and JV solutions. And that would be tinyurl.com/stop ransomware. And finally, Michael, our team had mentioned that we do augment Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Defender AV, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, et cetera. We do have a specific ebook that was prepared in collaboration with Microsoft and the Microsoft Defender team. You can check that out at tinyurl.com/MDEP and MorphSec, MDEP and MorphSec. Once again, thanks everyone for your time. Greatly appreciate it. And we will be sending you the on-demand videos from today. Have a great day.